The Buddha praises seclusion in the suttas in many places. So, assuming that that is what we should be doing, being secluded, how can we get ready for that seclusion? What can we do so that we can actually live in physical seclusion and actually benefit from it?
Right. The most obvious thing is basically to start exposing yourself to it, to seclusion. In other words, you're not going to prepare yourself for seclusion if you never leave the group, if you never even leave the group for the periods of time, if you never spend time alone, if you're always surrounded by people. Preparedness for seclusion cannot come out of it, because it's completely the opposite of it. So as helpful as people can be for one's well-being and so on, it's a compromise. Needing others, it's a compromise. Whether it, as a layperson or a monk, it doesn't matter. But when I say needing others, I'm talking more specifically about needing others for your existential well-being. That is a massive risk. That's a massive compromise if you never sort of develop out of it. Because that all those reflections that we are all owners of our actions. Nobody, basically, what you do stays with you. You live this life, then you go to the next one, or whatever. The point is, no other people can help you with that. No other people can take away your burden or add to it. It's always on you. Your intentions, your decisions, your actions will always stay in you. That's what I mean. You're bound with your actions and the results of it. So existentially, fundamentally, you're alone whether you want to be or not. So the practice comes out of the first step of recognition of that very existential principle, that you are alone, that you cannot be. It's always, the experience is always me and others. Even if others are your best, closest friends and partners and relatives and family, it's still others. You can have very close others, but for you, it's still just you. So when it comes to your feelings, your intentions, your responsibility, that cannot be shared among the group. Only as an excuse, basically, people would use it.
I can tell you that I feel like this and that.
Yeah. But that dimension of your feeling is inherently inaccessible to me, in as much as the dimension of my feeling is inherently accessible to anybody other than me. So it's not. That's what I mean. Solitude is not optional in other talks, because existence is not optional. And existence is solitary, basically. And that's why if somebody wants to overcome and undo bhava, the existence, you need to start recognizing these inherent principles of it. So for as long as you don't leave the group, how can you develop towards solitude? How can you see through it? How can you discern that the neutral feeling that the Buddha praises, basically, for which solitude is required? Because otherwise you're going to have most people who are not used to solitude, when they are left alone, the boredom is the first result of their experience. So they experience boredom, which is kind of, just bored. But it's actually much more than just that, because if you stay with your boredom, it starts turning into this restless panic, fear, anxiety. And that's when you realize how much you actually depend on your perception of others around you. How much you depend on that in order to basically conceal that inherent nature of existence, that you are alone, and fundamentally you're not in control either. That's why people are so terrified of boredom generally. It's the whole existence, the whole lifestyle goes against that principle of existence, that you're not in your control, that you are alone. So that's why every little reminders of that are very frightening for people who are not used to it. So of course you can't expect to just jump into it overnight, because you could legitimately lose your mind. But at the same time, to use that as an excuse to never do it and never prepare yourself for it, well, that's equally ignorant. So you want to recognize, okay, I'm not ready to jump into that extreme solitude right away. which means I should make myself ready. Because what do you think death is? And is it any different? Basically cessation, cancellation of all of your means of escape from yourself. Cancellation of sensuality, cancellation of company, cancellation of distraction. That's why death is like its ultimate terror for a Putujana who is fundamentally, existentially dependent upon others, upon sensuality, upon distraction. So, using examples of people jumping into solitude too quickly, losing their mind, as a proof that you shouldn't do that, well, that's just non-wisdom speaking. Using examples to prove that you can do it too quickly, sure, which means slow down a bit, but that still remains the goal. Whether you go to it fast or slowly does not compromise the quality of the goal, which is developing of the solitude. So that's what I mean. Whether it's a layperson or a monk, doesn't matter. You review your mind, reflect upon, and see, would I be ready to live in solitude without having anything to do, without having any interactions, or at least for the majority of my day? Would I be able to just be with myself? Or would I have to sort of extra commit to some sort of meditation technique to keep doing this? Basically just finding things to do. Would I need things to do in the solitude, or would I be at ease? So whatever the answer, exactly, delighting in solitude. I'm at ease in solitude. I prefer it, but that takes work and development. And yeah, I mean, don't take my word for it. Read the suttas, and just all the time, like learning how to delight in solitude. Not because you can't cope with others or because you hate others. All of those are wrong reasons, and they're obvious. They're going to become obvious to whoever goes into solitude. No, it's just genuinely preferring it over company. Preferring it over interaction, not because you're lazy or undeveloped. It's because you see it as a basis of wholesome, because you see it as mirroring the principle, the basic existential principle that you're not running away from. And that's through that discernment, then it will support mindfulness and everything else. But that's the thing, you ask yourself, am I ready for this? No. Okay, so as a layperson, I should really start preparing myself for it. Even if I never go into complete solitude or ordain, become a monk or whatever, I will get sick, I will die, my senses will fail. How do you think it feels, your senses failing? It feels like you're basically being confined more and more and more into one solitary box. Imprisoned. That's why the Buddha gave that simile of the four mountains coming closer and closer from every direction and crushing you eventually. As in, you have less and less space to move, less and less possibility of engaging with senses, which means less and less possibility of maintaining the domain of sensuality, the domain of distraction. So, if your whole life is about avoiding that, but at the same time you think you're practicing Dhamma, that's a complete contradiction in terms. Nobody denies that others can helpful and a group of like-minded people is helpful. But that's just in as much school is helpful for somebody who is learning a craft. But they can't do the craft for you. So they can help you initially if you perceive them as knowing more than you and so on. That's why if you find a friend that's equal or superior, yeah, go and learn from them. Not like associate for somebody who know you can't learn anything from on the pretext of Dhamma, but still just because of the association in itself. And that before you or others sort of quote that sutta about the noble friendship, it's quite obvious what the Buddha meant by it. Very often you hear that quote that the holy friendship is the whole of the holy life. Having a good friend is like the entire holy life. And if the Buddha stopped there, then yeah, you could say, okay, we need friends. But then the Buddha goes in the same sutta, the next line, and he says what he meant by it. He meant that here a young man hears about the Buddha and the possibility of enlightenment. Because of that, he regards him as a friend at that time. And because of that friendship in his mind towards such and such person who maybe became enlightened, he develops faith on account of which he goes forward, becomes a monk, and then becomes enlightened as a result of his efforts.
Yeah, that's the meaning of this.
That's exactly, yeah, that's the whole meaning of that. So, yeah, you find the good friend to learn from, but not the good friend to indulge your friendship because you're too afraid to be alone. or too distracted, or too anxious. So it's not negotiable at all. That's why whoever attained the right view in the suttas, all the Buddha would tell is like, go to solitude, empty hut, root of a tree, do it, because you would need that solitude for that. And the person with the right view would actually do it rightly. They wouldn't be using solitude for any wrong reasons. So that's why the Buddha was so just constantly just repeating that. And we said that before, when Ananda was with all those other Arahants and Aryans sewing robes for Katina, and the Buddha compared him to like a band of fishermen at the market shouting. And I'm sure they were very mindful and composed, certainly for our modern standards. Yet the Buddha was mocking them. This is ridiculous. What are you doing there? Oh, well, Lord, we are sewing robes for Katina. It was like, you're like a band of fishermen. And then started talking about the solitude and seclusion and non-socializing. So that's what I mean. You don't expect that overnight, like, oh, I will do it. But that doesn't mean that you don't start preparing yourself for it. You want to develop mental strength or any form of strength. You recognize your weakness, then you recognize what you want to develop. But avoiding solitude would be equivalent of you recognize your weakness and then justify to yourself that you shouldn't develop strength in the first place. Oh, I can't go into solitude. Yeah, you shouldn't. Company is the goal. Company. See, the Buddha said it's the noble friendship. But he didn't. He said it's the noble friendship. You find the friends that at least theoretically were developed more than you. Because of that, you try to match them. Because of that friendship, because of that trust, you try to match that development. You try to match that enlightenment of the Buddha. So yeah, in that sense, it was the attitude of friendship that determined your whole life as a monk, as somebody who practiced. But not the actual socially interacting and engaging with everyone and no one, really.